agriculture leader who served with the New York Society for 6 years, and during his tenure with us, he inspired an environmental consciousness which gave rise to the adoption of sustainability and earth care as part of the ethical culture mission. He led the Riverdale Younger Society for the previous 10.5 years. He's a single dad, and a special welcoming ceremony was held right here in the school to celebrate the adoption of his son, Andy. Please welcome Curt Collier.
Good morning, and happy to see all of you again. Thank you for inviting me out. I wanted to get here nice and early and feel rested when I showed up at the door. And then, of course, there's this thing called the March of Dimes going across. I think they should no longer call it that. I mean, what can you get for a dime anymore? It should be the March of 20s or something. Remember that when we were kids, we had that little card, you put a dime in it, you're supposed to collect those good stuff? We all just dated ourselves. So, yeah. I should reorder that because I should start by saying I'm an ethical culture leader who happens to work in groundwork. So since that continues to be where my heart is, and where my passion is what I do for a living is because of this movement. I am an ethical culture leader who expresses his ethical culture work through my work at the National Park Service, EPA. And I am continuously reminded of that because all the way that shapes my view of the work I do comes from my training from ethical culture, and continues to do that for a long time. And I also should say that it was really Monica who probably moved this organization more towards environmental science and kind of stuff more than anybody. So it's Monica. She's just too gracious. So yeah, she mentioned I'm living with Andy now. He's in college. For some of you want to know, he's getting his degree in civil engineering. And yeah, it's been really interesting raising a kid. Anybody done that before? I don't recommend it. I've learned a few things. This may be a surprise to you, but teenagers can be moody. Did you do that? That was a big shocker. And let's see, anything else about that? Yeah, they keep changing directions. That's kind of a shocker right there. And by the way, occasionally have you noticed that they blame you for things that you have absolutely no control of? Is that? Let me get a. Confirm that one. Check. I am not a bad person. Okay. Oh, he's doing great, and it's wonderful. And of course, being, when everybody's learning how to be a family and father, it's an continual process. We seem to do it our entire lives, right? It's an amazing thing that continues to go on. And one of the things I was just, the World Science Festival is coming up. New York City hosts that. Anyone heard about that or planning to go or participate? You should know this. There's the World Science Festival coming up, and all these great, wonderful things are going to be happening there. And I tend to keep track of that. I have for a number of years, and have always tried to attend things that they have going on, and I've missed every single one of them for some reason. But then the great thing about them is they put everything online, so you can actually go online, just like we do here. Thank you, Chuck. And they put everything and all the meetings and all that kind of stuff online, so we can see their comments. And there's a wonderful program that they put out in 2009 called The Enigma of Being Human. What does it mean to be human? And it's interesting because they're trying to distinguish as scientists what is the difference between us and the animals. And of course, one of the things when I was a raised child now with Andy is trying to figure out how should I train Andy? What's the best way? And of course, who can I listen to? And being the person I am, I turned to the warm embrace of science to figure all that out. And there's a really great show, and one of the things in there is this talk called The Enigma of Being Human. And Alan Alda interviews a bunch of scientists, E.O. Wilson, Dominic Johnson, some other people in there. There's a professor named Dr. Sarah Hardy, and she's an anthropologist, and she talks about child care and childbearing a little bit in that, which is one of the things that caught my film. And here's a couple of things that she learned. And first of all is that which species on this planet children develop and take the longest time to develop over time? Who has to remain in the caregiving of their parents more than the other species? Humans, right? Other ones, of course, can be with their children for quite a long time, but we are responsible, feel connected to them, and spend more time raising our children, which is one of the things why we all have gray hair, than anything else. And she learned a lot of things, even looking at societies across the United States, like hunter-gatherers, and looking about them. And she discovered some remarkable things. First of all, not only do we take care of kids for a much longer period of time, in fact, she discovered that even in their 18 and 19, that we tend to be giving them more resources than they give back. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. They can consume quite a bit until they're about 18 or 19. Until about age 20, then it begins to shift a little bit. So, here we go. Which is an interesting thing, that it takes so long for us to raise our kids. And of course, being a scientist, she looked at calorie counts, how much food we have to surprise, how long it takes to bring a kid, how long before that child begins to think of themselves as a person who gives back more than what they get, right? Which is what you as parents do all the time. And then how difficult that is. And she said, yeah, it takes an enormous amount of time. And of course, because we are a species who raises youth that takes so long to develop, that perhaps that one of the things that may make us different as a species is our capacity for mothering, she called it. And by that she meant mothering and fathering. She just called it. And you all lit up, and you all smiled, and you all gave me approval and encouragement. And how much of that is wired into our system? I love to walk down a street behind a young woman or a man pushing a baby carriage and watch people's faces. It's nice, you sit there and all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, it's like, there is this thing in us that makes us respond to another, even when that other is not ours, for a pretty early level. And perhaps because we know that a long time ago, when we probably raised young, parents died, they were killed in battle, or they were eaten by some kind of little thing. And yes, we had to rear the other little ones, and probably we are somewhat biologically wired, Dr. Hardy says, that makes us want to do that. And so it's interesting that maybe that is one of the first things that happens to us, is our ability to care. However, altruism, scientists try to say, is a much more different thing. Altruism is our ability to care for others even when we don't necessarily get anything back. I think when we look at a baby, I think we get a lot back. I walked down the street with a puppy in Norfolk, Virginia. I just moved to Norfolk, Virginia. I finally sold my home in Texas after all these years. I'm no longer living in Texas. Moved to New York, you'll be happy with that. Moved to Norfolk, Virginia to be closer to the National Park Service. And my son got a dog. He finally, remember that? One of the questions he says is, can I have a dog? He got a dog. So if you remember that question he asked me in front of the stage. His first, I said, you could ask me anything. He says, can I have a dog? Yeah, 3 years later, we finally got him one. And I walk his dog down the street, and I see the same thing. This is a cute, adorable little puppy. I'll send you pictures. We've got 38,000 of them. So my first grand fur baby. And I'm walking down the street, walking this dog. People wouldn't give me a time of day. Look at me. I'm not exactly a looker. And I'm walking down the street, And I'm surprised at how many people will walk up. I should have got a dog a long time ago. I'd have a better social life. Walking down the street and people talk with me. They don't talk with me, they talk with the dog. All right? You're walking down the street, this little thing, oh, look at that. Everybody comes up and pets the dog. And I'm like, wow, I should have done this a long time ago. People would find me much more interesting. But it seems like we have this drive within us to take care. And yet, how is it that then we can have this feeling, which humans sometimes do, to care for others that are not our own, that we're not biologically connected to, and who are not little ones, or little babies or children? What is it that drives humans? And that, as Alan Alda called it, he wanted to know what is the human spark that sets us apart, and maybe that has something to do with it. And so altruism was a very hot topic for many years. Many people still debate it. You know, I got my degree in philosophy. There was an old argument, even amongst the old philosophers, can any human be truly altruistic if we know you could take any set of examples or experiences and ultimately something is going to come back to us supposedly, and to do that. And so for Darwin, it was a real conundrum. Darwin looked at social species and insects and social animals, trying to study why some of them would sacrifice their lives or do these things also for others, and he thought it was the biggest attack against his theory of evolution. In fact, he thought he had to solve the enigma of altruism before he could figure out what to do. Why do some species care for others doesn't exactly fit into stories of competition and niche development and things like that. And so it was a big conundrum for them. In this film that Alan Alda brought out, as I mentioned, in 2009, there were a group of scientists he asked there in the room about this, and one of them, Dominic Johnson, basically said, well, you know, we went through an evolution of understanding. Darwin is acting at a time when there weren't genes. And in the middle of the last century, W.D. Hamilton came up with a solution that maybe that one of the things that happens is I will not take care of others, but I will take care of my kin. And as long as my genes, you know, the still idea that maybe this is a selfish gene type thing, as long as I feel like you're part of my gene connection, I will still help you and protect you and those kinds of stuff. And so in a way it is the survival of the species, but it's the survival of our kinship. That's what W.D. Hamilton in the middle of last century basically argued as to a way to do that. And of course, many of the biologists went on to prove myriad of reasons why that's not often true. Because a lot of times we do things for complete other strangers. I mean, many of you give anonymously of your time with no idea or hope for feeling of getting anything back. Theories went on from that. Dr. Trivers basically thought that maybe one of the things that drives this is I'll scratch my back as long as you scratch, you know, I'll scratch your back, you scratch my back. And that this theory of reciprocity, that maybe there's some calculus that goes on within our gene-brain connection that makes us say, well, I'll give you something, if the idea of not even right now, but later on you'll give something back to me. And of course that was dismissed by E.O. Wilson and others as well. And so another way of thought people thought is that perhaps I am a good guy. Maybe if I'm a good guy, maybe if I live my life in service for others, that somehow, some way, ultimately, my biology would dictate that I have this feeling that the universe will give something back to me. It's funny if you think of the Indian mystics figuring that out, you know, thousands of years ago with the whole notion of karma, that, you know, hopefully if you put out and you're a good person, you'll reap what you've sown somehow into the universe. And so it's really, really a difficult challenge just for a lot of people to think about this. Now, in the film, one of the things that also gets mentioned is this idea of kinship. Who is my kin? Because how many people live in the New York metro area? No, you all know. Or you live in New York, not how many, not you. Some 8 million of you. Then he says, well, if you put 8 million people, or 8 million chimpanzees, for example, in New York City, what would happen is there'd be a bloodbath. And so even if they are genetically related, the scientists would say, how is it possible that 8 million of you can live and within a few examples of crimes of passions and some other things, you're not all slaughtering each other? as other species have. What is that thing that makes us think that we can somehow make all this work? And in the film, they point out to early beadwork, that there were in Africa a group of people who were making beads, and they ground little holes in soapstones and put threads in them. The first kind of decorations were beadwork, they think. And then from these beadworks, for clothing decorations, people learned to make these, and they felt connections to other bead makers, even if they weren't kins. Because one of the things that we are also is a symbolist creatures. We also can use symbols very powerfully and connect through them, which other species we think don't necessarily do. We can connect through culture. And that culture also creates a sense of kinship. I feel connected to you, maybe because I don't know your genes, but your feathers look the same way I did, or the color of the palette of your skin, or for us, even more complex things like our religion or our political ideology, that somehow we as humans gravitate towards those things. We feel that that is our clan, our connection, and that's who we are willing to protect. We can also use that as a way of knowing who is our enemy. Right? If we think of our kin as people who are part of our tribe, our biological tribe, as thinking the way we do, or dressing the way we do, or having the same color skin, or having the same religion, then those who are not part of that are not our kin, and therefore the whole thing of the bloodbath and the warring that humans have been doing for quite a long time has been going on. This fictive kinship, as it's called, is an interesting thing, because if you're a smart enough political figure, and you know how to use kinship well, and all of the symbols of kinship, then perhaps you can get away with a lot of doing a lot of bad. Oops, there's a note here. Oh, it's from my boss. Do not talk about. Oh, because all your political funding comes from that person. Okay. So Truman, let's talk about Truman for a second. I mean, who remembers Truman and what he did with the bomb? No one remembers that anymore anyway, except August 6, 1945 at 8:16 a.m. in the morning. If you were really good at using identity of this one thing, if you're able to show who is your kin, if you're able to pull your tribes around a certain kind of symbol, we almost have a biology inside of that that responds to it, saying that this is our kin. These are the people. And the more tribalist you can get, as you can imagine, the more you feel like we are being attacked, that we are one or that we are special. This language that has been used by political figures throughout history, you can imagine the more capable any politician is able to use that language, the more danger it is to kind of pull that person apart, get those people to rally around you for whatever you do, and then to make a pointed distinction between the us and the them, right? And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Now, it's interesting also, though, is that you remember that inside of that, though, is this feeling that what drives that across all humans is our drive to be a part of and a connection to others, to be a part of kinship, and to care for others. So it's almost as if we took something good and we shaped it because of our ability to do that and worked it into something which can be wielded as a weapon, time and time again. I want to give an example kind of that of some studies that were done on looking at who voted for Truman in the last election. Yes, I think he is. What's interesting is that they then looked at groups across the United States and trying to figure out something. And here is the message. The message is that the American dream was dead. And in many places, we had let the American dream die. It is extremely expensive, as you know, for things like healthcare. right? It's an absolute disaster. I was told by the state of Virginia, because I was a gay male who had adopted a son, that I was not allowed to extend my health care benefits to my own child. Okay? Told flat to my face, and that the only solution of that would for me to get married. Someone told me that on the phone. Why I didn't record that, I don't know. But here it is, this year, 2019, or 2018 was when I was told that. It is still, these ideas that we move very far. Healthcare expenses are off the hook. I know a lot of people, good, hard-working people who work multiple hours and who have college degrees who cannot afford health care, which is a very frightening thing. Not only that, but cost of living expenses. I don't have to tell you, you live in New York, right? Cost of living has gotten unbelievably expensive. And how much do we pay to go to college? How much debt do kids have? Even these programs, so-called vocational training, which I advocate across the United States, these kids are paying thousands of dollars, sometimes more than a college degree, to get a degree in welding or something like that, which they could have learned traditionally through trades or those kinds of things in partnership with other people. And now they're heavily in debt in a job that may not pay anywhere near that. So there were a lot, and continue to be a lot, of economic challenges across the United States. And then if we start using the kinship of those other people let us down, and we're the people who are being attacked for our religious beliefs, or we're being attacked because of the color of our skin, or we're being attacked because of whatever thing we have, you can imagine how politicians can easily move into that location and will that sometimes to frightening consequences. Now, the study then was done looking across the United States to figure who voted for whom in the last election, and to try and figure out what communities, and they were looking for patterns. And it had to do with a lot with economic hardship, that if you went into communities with greater economic hardship, supposedly, that was the theory, that's what we were told, that you would find out that that's where the voters who voted for one party over a political party would be located. It also had to do with if you had a certain religious belief, or if you had, if your skin color was one way or the other. This was the assumption, and we went through and people looked at it and they found that it's pretty much to be true. But there were a lot of glaring examples where that was not true, where it was the same skin color, or it may have been the same religious background, or the same economic dire straits. And yet, for some reason, those people outside of New York City, those people still voted to what we think would be against their best interests, right? And so they were trying to figure out what was that thing that perhaps did that. And when they looked at the communities and studied the communities that seemed, for all reasons, would normally vote for one political party over the other, but didn't, when they looked at them, they found striking similarities. And one of the biggest similarities between all those groups, and they're all shared the same color, they may have shared the same religions, all those things, the one thing that connected those people who voted differently was the strength of their communities. And not just community. I'm talking about communities that actually created institutions that cared for each other. That more, in any county across the United States, where you have strong social organizations, where people feel supported, where people feel connected and welcomed in, their voice getting heard, where there's a sense of justice and equity, even if there is economic disparity, even if there is religious plurality, those communities tended not to vote for one political party over the other. That people tend, as my colleague in St. Louis found out when she studied people in Europe, that the more people feel supported, the less they are to rely on that kinship, that fictive kinship kind of ideology to feel like we're all connected. The more that we support each other, the more that we have organizations, the more community, strength of our community that we have, and those kinds of stuff that makes us all feel like I give to the universe and the universe somehow eventually gives back to me. Those communities seem to have strengths against them, seem to be inoculated against the use of fictive kinship type belief systems. Now, that raises a lot of questions as well, as I'm sure you're thinking about. One of the things I've always struggled with as an ethical culture leader is about what is the best way to develop a sense of altruism within our youth. I do this now. I'm the National Youth Program Director. I get to travel around the United States, luckily. I work with a lot of national parks. I work with NASA now. I work with other organizations and trying to create programs to engage that next generation with the goal that this next generation grows up to give back to their communities, right? Ultimately, what I want is that young person who's in this hometown with a lot of problems across the United States to look at their community and say, you know what, this can be fixed, this can be cleaned up, this can be turned around, and if I stick to it, it's going to happen. That's a really hard challenge in an area where people just can't wait to get out because things seem so dire, right? The environmentally so dire. But when I looked at that and when I've done these programs, what I've discovered is that if the youth feels supported through this whole process, if they feel heard, if they feel like people are trying to make a difference, if they feel that somehow that if they put in something, something gets back to them, they will stay in those communities and tough it out and try and make that city a much better place. And I've seen it time and time and time again. And I know for that to be a fact. I gave a talk before the I gave a poster, because I didn't want to really ready for a talk, at the American Society for the Advancement of Science, their convention in Austin, Texas. And basically, and I had talked about that my research shows that the more that I can support youth in these kinds of specific ways, the more likely they want to continue and to give back to that community. And a bunch of scientists came up to me and said, we saw this, we wanted to, you're supporting our research as it is now. The same thing. That somehow there is a need and belief into us, this sense of caring, that if you just support that, even with young adults, if you can help them through this whole process of schooling and finding a job and getting a career and all these things, even if they're in places of severe economic challenges beset with environmental calamities, those people will remain in that community with the desire that somehow this place is going to be a much better place. And that's a shocking piece of reality. There is this biology within us that says if I give something to the universe, somehow I hope that it comes back to me. And if I can feel that, if I'm in a community that's strong enough to give that thing back to me, then I'm probably going to see it. I just pretended a program. If it's my mom calling, tell her I'm busy. She always calls at the wrong time. I just attended a program at Grand Teton National Park. Mothers do that. I don't know what you're right in the middle of something right there, and that's when you get the phone call. They just know that they have to talk to you at that point. I run a program with Grand Teton National Park called the Mountains to Main Street program. I just came back there, got to spend a week again, as I do every year at Grand Teton National Park. And the National Park Service gives me funding to find youth ambassadors from cities across the United States and to bring those youth back to Grand Teton National Park and to train them in community engagement, specifically to engage new audiences who don't go to national parks, new people who've never been there. That's one of the programs I run. We pay youth to do this kind of stuff. We have a very particular training. And the training I use is similar to what I just described. The way the National Park Service, that just celebrated its 100th anniversary in 2016, one of the things that the National Park Service wanted to do is to look and get more people into parks. And so they started this huge ad campaign, and sure enough, the numbers of people attending the national parks have skyrocketed. I think Grand Teton National Park had 5 million visitors last year. 5 million people made there. I think they're in pale comparison to Yellowstone that gets like, what, 13 million? Which pales in comparison to which park? Which park has the most? Huh? Shenandoah, not Shenandoah, Great Smoky Mountains. Great Smoky Mountains still leads the nation in visitors because it's free. See there? Make it free and people go. Rather than $23 or $32, whatever it costs now. So anyway, we go there, and they were looking at all these record numbers of visitors. The problem was that the people visiting the park were not reflective of our nation. We are a diverse nation. You want to see everybody everywhere doing the same thing, right? And anytime there's a disparity and you walk into a place and you don't see, you have to ask the question, why aren't they here? It's not their fault, not their problem. It's our problem that we had to figure out and work on, right? That we have made it seem so unwelcoming. So Grand Teton had a meeting. They invited me to the meeting. We were looking at all these solutions to increasing diversity. And I proposed this theory with my colleague Megan Collier of Grand Teton National Park, that maybe we're doing this the wrong way. Let's do it a different way, I said. We're so busy trying to sell the assets of the park. Look how beautiful these mountains are. How many of you have been to Grand Teton National Park? Isn't it spectacular? Imagine this low, flat valley and these gigantic wall of mountains rising straight up. It's a thrust fault, and it's opened up, and you see this gigantic, jagged peaks cut by glacier. When I was there, I saw 15 moose from the airport to my camp. 15 mises. It was pretty amazing. And then in the winter, you go there, and there are literally thousands of elk. There's 6,000 elk they predict in the park in this one area during that, because they come out of the mountains to get food. It's just spectacular, just spectacular. There's a lot of reasons to go there. How many of you want to go there now, just because of me describing it, right? Let's go. I got there, it still has 3 feet of snow. Wait a little longer. And I've had this program now for 4 years, and in 4 years, what we've done is I say, don't sell the assets of the park to new audiences. Don't talk about the parks. I mean, the parks are great, but they're wonderful. Instead, I want my ambassadors to do something different. And this is a week-long training program that we put the youth for. What is the passion and needs of your community? What are the passions and needs of your community? And how can I use the assets of the national park to meet those needs? That's what we train them in. It's not training them how beautiful the skies look there, how wonderful the flora and the fauna, not this amazing landscape, right? You could think of 1,000, as an environmentalist, I could think of 1,000 reasons why you should go there and be a part of that. But that's not the training I recommend for these young people. My recommendation is, Jim, is what are the passions and the needs of your community? And how do you use the assets of the national parks, places, these open spaces, to meet those needs? It's a very, very different approach. And so the first thing that these young people often struggle is what are my needs? What are the passions of a community? And I say, you know what? One of the things that I learned after 20 years of working in the Bronx is if you don't know what people want or need, you're not going to be an effective naturalist. You're not going to be an effective activist, right? We're not here to tell people how they should live their lives. We're not here to say we have a better way for you to live. I'm here to find out what you're struggling with so that I can struggle with you to change that. Because as Adler said, the more I can do that thing, the more I become a better person as well, right? The whole kind of ethical culture engagement and that kind of stuff. So sure enough, we train these youth, the youth go off, the youth then work in their communities, they take people to the national parks, they might be a lot of reasons. We had a young lady who was dealing with a community that was dealing with a lot of violence in her community. These are mostly what we call the inner city, which is a euphemism sometimes, an inner city youth. These youth were coming from lower economic backgrounds and traditionally were youth who are struggling themselves with the same things as their communities. That's what makes them such great ambassadors. And one young lady then took these people to Mammoth Cave. Anybody been to Mammoth Cave in Kentucky? You should go see that too. Phenomenal. One of the world's largest. They went in there, of course, and when she's in there, she got the park ranger to talk about what it's like to be in a confined space that sometimes seems dark, and they turn the lights off. They told them they were going to do this, turn the lights off, and just be in that space for a second where they couldn't find any light, any pathway out of that, and had a conversation with the youth about that. Then they turned the lights back on, they talked about their feelings and the responses to their community. And then since then, they also created an opportunity for the youth to do some lint removal. Do you know one of the biggest problems in caves is that every time we walk in there, we all drop lint, and that lint accumulates in caves? It's weird, who knows? But they picked up pounds of this stuff. Yeah, who knows? And It had a tremendous impact on their community. A lot of those youth wanted to go back to Mammoth Park, right? It met some deep need, even though it wasn't about talking about the cave or some of the stalactites, world's largest cave. George Washington had been there. They had mined the guano from there to use even during the Revolutionary War to make explosives. All these kind of other cool things. None of that gets mentioned to the youth. The only thing is we're going to go talk about some difficulties in our lives and how to make them out. Another one talked about the difficulty that young fathers who are not connected with their kids were looking for a place to take their kids that they could afford, and where the young fathers could show that they knew something, such as taking their young kids fishing. So that's what we did. And our results, which are still emerging at this time, tend to show that the people who participate in that national park program are more likely to want to go back than if I had just put them in air-conditioned buses, drove them to some spectacular place, had a nice day, and then drove back. Somehow, if we connect and meet the needs of people where they are, using even public spaces, they're wanting to go back to those places. Same thing in our communities. If you feel that that community has supported, connected to you, given you something that's back, the more likely that you are, first of all, going to feel connected to that, and second, the more resistive to fictive kinship that you'll be. The more resistant to messages that we are just one people. Those messages just kind of bounce off of them and they feel supported. And so that's where we are to do. One of the last things I'd like to end you with is every year I get to work in Yellowstone National Park. Love Yellowstone, phenomenal. There's a great new book that's out there on Mammoth Hot Springs I highly recommend. You're a reading crowd. So it's this great book, and this guy is talking about the Mammoth Hot Springs. Now, Mammoth is this gigantic thermal springs that have been for 10,000 years in Yellowstone National Park. Has anyone seen Mammoth Hot Springs? Some of you have, yeah. Another thing you gotta go see. And interesting, he's studying this. He spent his entire scientific career looking at the extremophiles, the thermophiles, the bacteria, the ancient organisms that can live in these hot pools. Despite the boiling, scalding hot water, and despite the extreme either acidity or in some places alkalinity of the water, things live there, quite happily so. I mean, you look at this boiling water and it's just full of sulfur and it's hot and it's extremely acidic, and things live there and love it. And he was trying to figure out how it is that they developed and why they're like that. And he found out that not only do these colonies grow there, but as they grow and they live, they have shaped the way Mammoth Hot Springs looks. Now, the formation of the rock has been shaped by the biology of the living species living there. The reason why he thought this book was so interesting is he took it to NASA, and they're now using this thing. They can look at these travertine terraces, which is what they are, this kind of rock, and be able to tell from photographs whether or not biology on a distant planet have shaped that rock or not, which is one interesting way of looking at that, right? This guy's research is pretty amazing. I say that because life shapes landscapes in an amazing way. We are now in the Anthropocene, you know that? We're no longer in the Holocene. We're in the Anthropocene, which basically means that our landscape has been shaped by us, by one species. We now find pollution levels, everything else across the planet. We find our presence even now in soils and everything else, which shows that the rock itself, our landscape around us, is being shaped as it has through millennia by the life forms living on it, in this case ours, our species. I hope that in some future history, and I know this is not possible given the depths of space, but give me a little science fiction fantasy, that some alien species comes to visit us. Notice the caveat. Thank you. That they'll look at the landscape of Earth and tell that this was shaped by a life form, and that the life form built something beautiful and connected and loving. That is interesting, one of our capacities. Our capacity is empathy, and our capacity is altruism. The only thing we have to do through the strength of community building is to make sure that that wins out. Thank you.